Okay, let's quickly finish talking about these defense mechanisms. The next defense mechanism is reaction formation. And this is where a person is going to make their unacceptable impulses into the opposite form. So, for example, if you really, really don't like your psychology teacher, which I know would never happen, you would tell everyone that you actually love her. This is not lying, okay? So think of this in terms of a child who's being abused. They have really deep dislike for their abuser, right? But it might be someone that they cannot come out and say that they have dislike for. And so they would come out and show feelings of compassion or love towards that person. That's reaction formation. The next is rationalization, something that teenagers are really, really good at. This is when we try and create logical explanations for our behavior in order to justify it. So if you really want to go to the movies with your friends, you're going to justify going to the movies instead of studying for an exam by saying that, oh, I'm going to fail that test anyway, so I'm just going to go instead of studying. That's rationalization. Denial is when we refuse to perceive reality in order to protect ourselves from it. So you get rejected from a college that you want to go to. However, you just tell people that you're still going there. That's denial. Okay, let's talk about neo-Freudians. So neo-Freudians, what that means is that these people believe in the majority of what Freud said. However, there's parts of it that they change. So Alfred Adler is the first one, or I'm sorry, not Adler. Alfred Adler believes that during childhood, there are tensions that children need to get over. However, instead of them being sexual in nature, they're social in nature. So children deal with the inferiority complex instead of the Oedipus complex. And this is when they are trying to grow their superiority and their power, usually around that same time in their life, right? When between the ages of about 3 and 5, when children are really trying to become their own independent person. And this is that inferiority complex that children deal with. The next neo-Freudian is Karen Horney, and she believed that the social aspects of childhood growth and development, just like Adler, and children are trying to overcome their sense of helplessness. They're trying to become their own person. However, she countered Freud in the sense that women do not have weak superegos, which Freud thought of. She said, no, you know what? Women have just as strong moral compasses as men do, and no, they don't just want to have a penis. That's what Freud said about women. So she kind of looked at the women's side of things. And then finally, Carl Jung believes in the collective unconscious. He believes that we have a common reservoir as a human species that have derived from evolution. We have these archetypes that are universal images that appear across cultures in our myths, in our art, in our stories, in our dreams. And these are all kind of the collective unconscious that we have. For example, the struggle between good and evil is something that appears in all cultures' stories and dreams and myths. And so that's a archetype that we all share. The idea of a maternal figure or a damsel in distress are also ideas and images that appear in many stories and dreams. Okay, so let's assess this. Let's talk about it. How are we going to actually determine what our unconscious processes are? Well, in order to do that, we need to have some sort of projective test. So if we are going to evaluate your personality, we have to come up with some sort of instrument that would reveal our unconscious, right? And so they came up with two main projective tests that are used in order to determine what is in our unconscious mind. The first is the thematic apperception test, and this was developed by Henry Murray. And basically what it is people express their inner feelings by telling a story of images. The actual test is a series of 32 images, and people would come up with a story that they would tell using those images, and that story would then be used to talk about the underlying ideas that are going on in the person's unconscious. So here are some examples of those pictures. They're usually ambiguous, which means they don't really have any sort of meaning to them. And the person would just come up with a story that would deal with these pictures. It is said that the pictures work best if the characters in the images are similar to the person who's actually writing the story. The next test would be the Rorschach INKBLOT test, and you've probably seen these before. And this is the idea where people would be given a set of 10 ink blots, and they needed to say what they saw in those ink blots. And from what they saw in the ink blot, they would be analyzed and interpreted to see, oh, well, you saw a cat. Well, that means that obviously you are a little bit feisty. Okay, so that's the idea of the Rorschach test. So let's criticize these tests. Obviously, these tests lack both reliability and validity. They are still used today. However, they're more objective, right? I'm sorry, not objective, subjective. They're more subjective. The problem is that even trained raters, so people who are trained to use these tests, evaluate the same patient differently, okay? So the same patient can come up with different interpretations because of how that rater determines what the patient said. And then finally, the projective test might misdiagnose a normal thought as pathological. This is the idea of validity. So it's going to say that someone has an issue when they really don't. So there are issues with reliability and validity.